It all started a month or so ago. I got home from grocery shopping pretty late, around 8 p.m. Also, I had the day off since it was a Sunday, so I figured I might as well take the chance to get some extra sleep. I took a quick shower, got in my bed, and fell asleep pretty quickly. But at some point in the night, I woke up. I have never had sleep paralysis before, but it was kind of similar to what I think it's like. I felt conscious, but I couldn't move. I couldn't even open my eyes. The thing is, I could feel my whole body. I felt something start tickle my feet, and I felt every bit of it. I say tickling, but it was really almost like scratching. It was really light 1 second and then like someone was crawling at my feet the next. I felt so fucking terrified. It was this deep, primal fear. I think everyone's probably had a nightmare about something like this happening to them. I did too when I was little. But it was actually happening to me in that moment, and I didn't know what to do. A part of me was grateful that I couldn't open my eyes. I don't know what I have to do. When I woke up, I honestly thought it was a nightmare or something, because my house seemed fine. I actually checked around to see if anyone had broken in, but no one had, or at least something seemed like it. My door was unlocked, but my only pair of keys was in my drawer, so I must have just forgotten to lock it. Unless someone had my apartment keys, it would have been impossible to get in. I have no clue how a person could have gotten in. The only problem was it didn't stop. It was every single night after that night. It didn't matter when I went to sleep, I would feel that damn tickling sensation. I tried pulling an all-nighter, but I eventually fell asleep and it was back. I know some of you will ask, oh, why didn't you install a camera or something? Or get someone else to help? Well, the thing is, I did. I got one of those cheap cameras you use to keep an eye on babies and installed it in my room at a bird's eye angle the day after it just happened. I went to bed, felt the tickling again, but then when I woke up and checked the footage, there was nothing there. It literally felt like I was going insane. I knew what had happened, but the proof was right there and it contradicted me. So I shrugged it off and decided maybe it was just me feeling weird or having some bad dreams or anything other something. Yes, I know how fucking stupid that sounds in retrospect, but I mean, what else was I gonna do? It was way easier for me to tell myself that it was just something wrong with me than anything else, but it just kept getting worse. I tried to limit sleeping as much as possible. I probably consumed enough coffee for the average American's lifetime. I used clips to pinch myself when I got sleepy. It worked a little, but only for a few days before I would eventually fall asleep again, and I was so sleep deprived and irritable because of it that it affected every single day in the part of me. I was doing badly at my job. My friends started to avoid me, and it really felt like my life was starting to fall apart. And the worst part is I know it's real. I know it's real because I have started getting scabs all over the soles of my feet. I'm not a really physically active person. I don't go to the gym. So how the fuck am I getting those if this isn't real? So I called one of my close friends, let's call him Jake, to try and see if he could help me out. I have known Jake for a long time. He's been my best friend pretty much ever since I was little. We both grew up in a very conservative area, so his support meant the world to me. He always made me feel pretty. So when I moved out to the East Coast, I kind of half expected him to follow me, and he did. We do practically everything together these days, from getting dinner to rooming together to even talking this protein shake thing that he got me on. He was really the only person I trusted to not call me crazy with something like this. And he lives pretty close by, so it wasn't too hard to convince him to do it for me. I got home from work from the day I decided to talk to him and gave him a call from my cell phone. It took a few rings for him to pick up. Jake, yeah, what is it? It probably sounds pretty silly, but it was good to hear his voice again. We had grown more distant ever since it started, and it was just reassuring to hear him. Well, I paused a little and tried to think of a way to phrase it that didn't sound insane. Someone's been doing something to me at night. I know how that sounds, but it's not. Jake was silent for a bit before he said, "Sure, I will be there. I know I'll be creeped the fuck out if someone was tickling me at night, so I got you. Let me tell you one thing. As soon as he agreed to come over, I was so relieved. He came over, we got some pizza and played some games together. And then when it was dark outside, I asked him to sit right outside my door and see if anything happened. We also set up a shit ton of cameras so there wasn't a single blind spot in my entire apartment. Then I fell asleep, and I shit you not, it happened again. I had tucked my feet inside my covers, like I used to do when I was little and thought that monsters were real. But maybe after an hour, I felt the shits start to move and my feet were exposed. I couldn't move, same as all the other times. You can guess what happened next. I checked the footage once I woke up and it was the same thing as always. There was nothing. I literally could not understand it. Throughout the entire night, looking at the footage, my sheets were even in the same position. I hadn't even rolled over in my sleep and exposed my feet or anything. I was just living in the same goddamn position the entire night. It was literally impossible for my feet to have been tickled. Jake was right there outside of my door the entire time. But yes, although I'm ashamed to admit it, I even thought maybe he had done it for a moment. But that didn't make any sense, because the cameras showed he had just been sleeping in front of my door the whole night. Look, I know I sound batshit insane talking about how something's been tickling my feet at night, but it's driving me crazy. So I was paranoid. I have been afraid to be alone in my apartment, and I have been living all my nights on all the time. So my question is there any disease or psychological condition that causes this? Or is there any way someone could be doing this to me? I really don't think it's sleep paralysis or anything. It's just not possible. I can't afford a therapist or a psychiatrist or whatever. Anyone, any kind of helps. I just need to get this to stop. I'm still petrified after this encounter with my new patient. My name isn't really Derek, but I'll say it is for the purpose of this story. I work at a psychiatric hospital called Serene Hills. Lately, I feel more like a patient than a worker, but after what happened, I'm sure you would understand. My heart is pounding right now just thinking about it, but I have to get this off my chest. First off, don't let the word Serene in the name fool you. We take in many patients who are unwanted in other hospitals or too troublesome to manage. It may sound awful, but it's a grim reality in a grim world. Your stranger's day is simply a Tuesday for me, but I wouldn't have it any other way. I enjoy the excitement, the challenge, and getting to know the patients. My job is to assist with patients' day-to-day activities, as well as keeping the patients calm and cooperative. Being persuasive really helps, and you may think that's counterintuitive for my line of work. But if you know your patients, it's not hard. I'm not a big guy, so I tend to employ more brain than brawn. I can't say the same for some of my co-workers, especially Brolin. He's the best example of how to wrestle any problem into submission, but it was ultimately his ruin. On the day of the incident, we had this new patient admitted. It wasn't very hard to guess that he was nervous. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were wild and he had frayed brown hair stuck out in all directions. One weird trait that I noticed was how bushy his eyebrows were, and I even referred him as such. I'm not exactly sure what it was about him, but I felt there was something more going on. Despite my wariness, I thought of him as a delicate deer that shouldn't be spooked. He was admittedly quiet for a while, but I continued to keep a close eye on him. Think he's nervous enough? Brolin scoffed as a new patient passed us in the hall. Oh, you mean eyebrows there? Yeah, no kidding. Looks like he's on the brink of an episode. I like that. For a while I didn't think you had a sense of humor. I have always had one. It's just a matter of whether people pick up on it. If I had to guess through, I had to say Mr. Eyebrows doesn't have much of one. It would be very hard to find much amusing about this place. That's fair point. Day shift said everyone's been acting up more than usual today. Oh, it's a full moon. What? It's cause of the full moon. What's that got to do with anything? You haven't noticed yet. Patients always get more restless during a full moon cycle. You are jerking my leg. Well, no jerking necessary. Ask any one of our staffs who's worked more than 6 months. They will tell you. There's always something weird going on during full moons. You know the word lunar from moon and lunatic are related? No way. Yes, it is. Go look it up. Some say it's due to a gravitational pull that brings on a strange anomalies or something. Anoma what? You're so typical, Brolin. What's that supposed to mean? Well, it doesn't matter. Hey, it looks like the soup's headed this way. Let's look orderly so he doesn't burst our chops. So the start of our shift continued toward the evening, and it didn't take long to notice the truth of the full moon phenomenon. Patients were less cooperative than usual and more resistant to taking their medication, among other things. As I promised myself, I consistently kept an eye on our newbie. He was just nervous at first, but he seemed to slowly descend into madness into the further of a day it got. My inquisitiveness about our new patient got to me, so I swung by the records office and asked to take a look at his file. Turns out they had good reason for Eyebrows being here. His name was Dimitri Brown, and there was a police report attached. Apparently, he was still in the process of being convicted for multiple murders. They found the dismembered bodies of his family strewn about his home. A neighbor showed up after hearing noises and found Dimitri crying and holding the remains of his family. The neighbor immediately called the police. They looked Dimitri up on the assumption that he was the killer. It was understandable with Dimitri's DNA all over the bodies, but then again, they were his family. He managed to escape jail, killing some people that got in his way by the same method of dismemberment. No one witnessed exactly how he got out. After his escape, he was eventually apprehended. While back in custody, he was diagnosed after speaking to multiple psychologists. This diagnosis got him admitted to a psychiatric hospital until his trial was over. He escaped the other hospital multiple times without any casualties, and those led him here. Dimitri always maintained that he blacked out and could never remember killing anyone. He was remorseful, which was unusual for someone who completely lost touch with reality. Perhaps there was more to this guy. After further psychiatric interviews, it was determined that Dimitri had a delusion about something possessing him any time he killed. He even said that there may be more victims because he had these blackouts many times before. No one could prove that he willfully killed anyone, and there were never any witnesses that survived, and for that reason he survived anyway. What a strange case. Something about it didn't add up. But what made sense in a world that was just as mad? I went about my routine with a tingling sensation in my bones, as if my body knew something my mind didn't. Later in the evening, Dimitri was mumbling to himself pretty loud and constantly looking out the windows, scared of the dark. Eyebrows. Brolin questioned the patient. You wouldn't understand, Dimitri started, ending in unintelligible graverish. Hey, what's he was saying? My muscle cord directed this at me. Well, I don't know, Brolin said. He's probably not saying much of anything, so leave him alone. His name is Dimitri, by the way. Yeah, I know that very well. It's bothering me. I don't like it when I can't understand what someone's saying. Hey, what are you mumbling about? Brolin enunciated his words to Dimitri as if talking to someone who was slow. Usually Brolin just makes snide comments at everything and doesn't zero any patients out. Why he had such an interest in Dimitri was beyond me. I got up and walked over to supervise Brolin. Time. What's the time? It was. The patient mumbled out. Dimitri turned to me with wide, feral eyes. Despite how it sounded on the surface, it didn't seem like odd ramblings to me. There was an earnest understanding in his eyes. It's 8:15. You'll be going to bed soon. Oh no, I need to stay out here. I want to look out the windows. I like to see the night sky. It's so pretty out. Can I please just... Yes, you can do, Ibro said. Lights out is at 8:30. Brolin interjected. Please, can I? Will you let me in? Dimitri turned back to me with pleading eyes, and I honestly felt bad for him. I'm so sorry, buddy. I don't break the rules. And Brolin right. We have to get everyone in by 8:30. So I can't. He stormed off and began rambling incoherently again. I followed lightly behind him, still maintaining a strong urge to stay diligent in watching him. 15 minutes later, we had all the patients rounded up and in their beds. To the charging of someone, the worst of which was Dimitri, who was still rambling loudly in his room with no sign of letting up. I can't. I need to be out there, he pleaded, but we insisted he stay in his room. 10 minutes later, his filibuster was getting even worse. I can't take it anymore. He's going to solitary, Brolin yelled. He threw down his magazine in annoyance, nostril flaring in excellent fashion. I didn't find it necessary yet, but he was keeping his roommate and other patients up. Now, when we first took him out of his room, he was somewhat complained at first, until Brolin started going into him. You need to shut up. We're going to solitary confinement, and there are no windows there. That's what you get for not listening. Dude, cut it out, I whispered to my co-worker. That's not helping anything. Well, I can't. I need to look out the window. Oh, Brolin, come on. You forgot to tell him, I said, putting on my most convincing cadence. Tell him what? That's the way they put a window in the solitary cell. Brolin looked at me blankly, and I leaned in with a slight nod. As clueless as Brolin was, he could at least understand some subtitles. Oh, you're right, I can't believe I forgot. They just put that window in this week. Must have slipped my mind. Really? It's actually a great view. You will love it, I hope. We only hoped that he didn't catch on, at least not until it was too late. It seemed a ridiculous blow, but staying on the patient's good side means that they will want to believe you. I never enjoyed lying to patients, but when it comes to keeping everyone safe and copacetic, you have to do what's necessary. Minutes later, we were at the padded cell where our new patient would spend his night. While not as manic as before, he was still very much on edge. Just as he got his foot into the door, he could tell Dad would lie to him about the window. So he screamed. He fought against us to get out, and while Dimitri was a lanky fellow, he definitely had some scrap in him. If he was always this strong, it could explain how he managed to escape before. Even as beefy as Brolin was, it took the two of us to wedge our patient through the door. Even then, it wasn't without incident. I had some minor scratches and scraps, but Brolin had a bright red mark on his cheek where Dimitri landed a decent blow. Brolin touched his hand to the spot and grimaced a bit. Ouch, I said. There is nothing. It's nothing, man. The coldness in Brolin's voice startled me. He was thoroughly pissed off. We let the nurse take a look at that. Come on. You can't do that. Brolin replied with silence as I walked on and soon felt the absence of my fellow orderly. He didn't just fall behind. Brolin hadn't moved an inch. Brolin, you coming or what? No, I'm good. I'm gonna hang out here for a second. Why? Brolin picked up on the suspicion tone in my voice and shot me a dark look that bothered me. Something in his eyes was beginning to raise some major red flags. Brolin left the keys inserted in the cell door, and I knew it was no coincidence. Get me out of here. I started walking back to the cell to hopefully de-escalate the situation. Please let me out. It's for the best. I think our new patient needs to learn more manners, Brolin added. He banged on the solitary door with his fist. Maybe I can shut you off for a good while. Man, come on, don't make this. Stay out of this. It's between me and eyebrows here. He needs to understand how things work around here. Stand by so you can open the door for me when I'm done. Hey, you don't. Before I could get another word in, Brolin cracked open the door and threw the keys at me. As I caught the keys, Brolin had wriggled through the opening before yanking the door. As I caught the keys, Brolin had wriggled through the opening before yanking the door shut behind him. I approached the buried opening to the cell just as the room turned a shade of blue. Brolin had engaged his stun gun on Dimitri, who fell to the floor. That will teach you to mess with me. Brolin spat the words at the patient. Dimitri attempted to stand up, but not before Brolin tackled him to the floor. My blood began to boil. Not only was Brolin getting way out of this line, it forced me to witness his atrocity. What the hell are you doing? Get out of here! I screamed. The door locked behind him automatically, so I had no choice but to stay so I could open it for his safety. There was no way I could leave him locked in there with the patient, but I wasn't entirely sure I could stop him without getting hurt myself. Brolin, I said stop. I shouted again through the windowed bird. I shouted again through the windowed bars, but the assault had already begun. Knowing Brolin for the last 2 years, I'd only seen him snap one other time, and it was noticing close to this. He was basically holding the guy down and wailing on him. Get off him, hey! I shouted. Brolin didn't respond, so I had no choice but to radio for help. Never in my life did I ever think I would have to call for help because of a co-worker instead of an inmate. Right after I got a confirmation for backup, it dawned on me that we were the furthest from the station, which meant our backup wouldn't get here before Brolin took this any further. I wasn't a snitch, but this was a huge breach of safety protocol and morality. I needed help to stop Brolin, or at the very least another witness to cover my ass. Hey, what's that? Brolin called out. What's wrong with you? I don't know, he's convulsing. Probably because you tased him and beat the shit out of him. You muscle-headed asshole. Get out of there before this gets any worse. Through the bar, I could only tell that Brolin released the patient and there was some thrashing around. And that was when I heard a deep growl from the room. Is he growling? Is he growling? I asked. Yeah. Do people normally do that if they're seizing? Well, I want to see that what happens. What the hell is wrong with you again? Just get out of from here. Through the barred slot in the door, I couldn't see the patient clear enough to discern what was happening. I got that weird tingling sensation that something otherworldly was afoot. I wanted to check on Dimitri, but I also knew he was dangerous, and the situation could easily set him off. Brolin began to back a step towards the door when Dimitri sprung up and lunged forward so fast that it was all one blurry motion. I recoiled at the loud bang against the metal door. Something hit it so hard, the door actually bent outwards. Brolin, I said, my voice shaking. I heard labored coughing and wheezing from the other side. It would take another minute for help to arrive, so I apprehensively inched the door open to check on Brolin. Lighting was not on my side, and I could only faintly make out the slumped form of my co-worker on the other side of the door. Oh my God, I said faintly. The idea of Brolin hitting the door that hurt made me wrench. I was partially surprised he was still breathing. He was going to need some serious help. I clicked on my flashlight to get a better look, but the survival part of my brain told me to locate the patient first. Dimitri was now in a fetal position in the corner, completely nude from having ripped off his own clothes. His matted hair was wilder now. until he stood up and I realized his hair wasn't just wild. It was coming out of parts of his face that weren't natural. With each lumbering step he took towards me, more hair sprouted from his body and he was way more muscular than I originally thought. As I watched him, I realized that his body and muscle mass had actually tripled. A word came to mind to describe what he looked like now, but my mind wouldn't accept it. No, they aren't real. I tried to warn you once more. The beastly form of Dimitri spoke in a snarl. I killed those people, but I couldn't help it. My mind seized up despite every inclination to run away. All I could think was to not look him in the eyes. I cast my gaze to the floor, where I watched a crawling shadow of a furry figure. His speech was nothing but glottal noises, and his shadow thrashed for a moment as it grew larger to a monstrous proportion. I wanted to look up, but my mind stayed fixed on that impossible silhouette because it was less real. Still looking down, I saw Brolin being dragged into the darkness. He pleaded for mercy in wheezing breaths. I only heard tearing, snapping, and Brolin's agonized screams of pain. He would not be afforded any mercy this night. My hand shook uncontrollably, causing the light to dance about the room. I looked up in time to see a bloodied, old fish face approach me. It no longer resembled a man save for the bipedal statue. The beast's face was so close to mine that I could smell the hot breath and freshly chewed meat of my co-worker. The yellow canine eyes were horrifying and vexing all at once. I dared not to move out of pure fear, moving at an agonizingly slow pace. It sniffed at me for a moment and grunted as if it savored my scent. I had to squeeze my eyes shut to stifle a scream. Then it suddenly brushed me aside and cantered into the hallway. In shock, I watched the unnatural beast make its way through the hall and snip about. It could have hurt me without even trying, but chose not to. One of the security guards came running in and put his brakes on when he caught sight of the creature. Holy hell! His words of amazement drifted away in an echo. The guard stayed put, his hand slowly reaching for his gun. The beast locked eyes with the security guard and side-stepped around him with little effort. Never taking his eyes away, the guard witnessed the old camper away out of sight. Seconds later, we heard the squeal of metal followed by the shattering sound of glass in the distance. I shrouded the guard over to check on Brolin. After seeing him, we knew right away he was a lost cause. In hopes to find the beast, we both ran down the hall to find a broken window with the metal bars bent completely out of shape. Something bounded away in the moonlight outside, but I couldn't say for sure. What he could confirm was hearing a long, wailing howl before it was all over. After that night, we never saw Dmitri again. Brolin was soon pronounced dead by a nurse, or what was left on him anyway. Now we had the task of explaining what happened without getting committed ourselves. I didn't bother telling anyone else what really happened, but Dmitri certainly had reason for wanting to be in the hallway, near the windows. He knew that if he was close to them, he could escape while he still had control and avoid killing anyone. He was actually trying to protect us. Damn. That aspect made me wonder why Dmitri didn't tell us what was going on. But the answer was quite simple. No one would believe a sane person to be a beast of this kind. So why in the world would anyone give credence to a person leveled mentally ill? After that, I only worked day shift and always take time off during full moon cycles. I even barricade myself in my home those nights in fear that my beastly patient will come back to finish what he started. Thinking back on the events, I can only summarize that he spared me for being kind to him. Or maybe it was just because he had a fresh meal. The truth is, I don't rightly know, and somehow that is much worse. Even now, I'm jumping at the sound of a dog barking outside. It sounds ludicrous, but I just can't help it. Here he goes again and again and again. I'm not entirely sure but I swear that sometimes I hear a familiar howling. My denial convinces me that I don't recognize it. The howling is very different from the dog. It's something more feral, primordial even, and maybe it's just me, but every time I hear that howl, I swear it gets closer each time. But I'm not sure it's just my imagination or something else. My name is Mark, a pseudonym I use out of necessity, for what I am about to recount may indeed shake the very core of your understanding of reality. It is a tale steeped in horror, madness, and a slow descent into the abyss of the human psyche. This is my story, a chronicle of the haunting of the asylum, and the terror that still claws at the fringes of my mind. The journey began under the auspices of a seemingly mundane assignment as a freelance photographer. As a freelance photographer, I was commissioned by a local magazine to capture the desolate beauty of abandoned structures for their Halloween issue. Hollow Creek Asylum, shattered and decaying, was to be my subject. Little did I know it would also become my tormentor. The asylum stood alone in the wilderness, a crumbling edifice of Gothic architecture, its spires picturing the grey sky like scattered fingers. The atmosphere was oppressive, the air thick with the scent of rot and decay. As I crossed the threshold, an icy chill enveloped me, as if the building itself were exhaling its malevolence. The entrance hall was vast and echoing, every step I took reverberating through the empty corridors, an unwelcome intrusion in a place long forgotten by the living. I began my work. The click of my camera shattered the only sound in the suffocating silence. Dust motes danced in the thin beams of light that pierced the boarded windows, illuminating the remnants of a bygone era. It was when I ventured into the basement that the true nature of Hollow Creek began to reveal itself. The stairwell descended into darkness, the air growing colder with each step. The flashlight in my hand cut through the inky blackness, revealing rows of rusting metal beds, each one fitted with restraints. The sight was enough to unsettle the bravest of souls, but I pressed on, driven by a morbid curiosity. At the far end of the basement, hidden behind a vault's wall, I discovered a door. It was heavy, reinforced with steel and covered in strange arcane symbols that seemed to writhe and shift under the beam of my flashlight. With great effort, I pried it open. The room beyond was small, and the stench of decay was overwhelming. Chains hung from the ceiling, and the floor was stained with the dark, concealed remnants of blood. In the center of the room was an operating table, encrusted with dried blood and surrounded by grotesque surgical instruments. As I approached, a glint of metal on the floor caught my eye. I picked it up, a small ornate key. The moment it touched my skin, a searing pain shot through my skull, and I was plunged into a vision of unspeakable horror. I saw doctors and nurses, their faces twisted in sadistic glee, performing macabre experiments on helpless patients. They cut and sliced with gleeful abandon, the screams of their victims filling the air. Standing in the corner, shrouded in darkness, was a figure whose presence exuded pure evil. Its eyes, twin pools of malevolence, locked onto mine, and I felt my sanity begin to unravel. The vision dissipated, leaving me gasping for breath on the cold stone floor. I wanted to flee, but a sinister compulsion rooted me in place. Pocketing the key, I continued my photographic exploration, though each snap of the shutter felt like a tolling bell, counting down the moments until my doom. Returning to the main floor, I began to hear it. Footsteps echoing behind me, growing louder and more insistent. I spun around, but the corridor was empty. The temperature plummeted, and my breath misted in the air. Then came the whispers, barely audible at first, a sibilant susurration that grew louder with each passing second. They called my name, not with familiarity, but with an airy, predatory intimacy. Panic set in, and I ran. But the asylum had transformed into a labyrinth, corridors stretching into infinity, doors appearing and disappearing at random. My mind was fracturing, each step dipping the sense of dread that gnawed at my sanity. The whispers became screams, the cries of the damned echoing through the halls. In my frenzied flight, I stumbled into a room that was not on any of the asylum's blueprints. It was small and windowless, the walls covered in symbols similar to those on the basement door. At the center was a circle of blackened, melted candles. The air was supposed with a palpable malevolence. I realized too late that I had entered the very heart of the asylum's darkness. The door slammed shut with a deafening finality, and the temperature dropped to an unbearable cold. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into absolute darkness. Then I felt it, a cold, clammy hand wrapping around my throat, lifting me off the ground. I struggled, gasping for breath, but there was nothing to fight against. There was nothing to see. As my vision dimmed, I was filled with a sense of utter despair. This was how it would end, alone and forgotten in a place that devoured souls. But then, just as suddenly, the grip released. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, my body trembling with fear. The room was empty, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. I knew I had to get out. Stumbling through the corridors, I finally found the exit. The sunlight was blinding, the fresh air a shock to my system. I drove away from Hollow Creek Asylum, my hands shaking on the wheel. But the terror had not ended. The nightmares began that night. Visions of the asylum, the patients, the malevolent figure haunted my sleep. The whispers followed me, even in my waking hours, a constant reminder of the darkness I had encountered. I still have the key. Though I have tried to rid myself of it, it always finds its way back, a cursed token of my encounter with Devas. I fear the entity I encountered at Hollow Creek is not confined to the asylum. It waits and it whispers. My sanity is slipping, the boundaries between reality and nightmare blurring. I write this not for sympathy, but as a warning. If you ever find yourself near Hollow Creek Asylum, stay away. Some doors should never be opened, and some horrors should remain buried in the dark. And remember one more thing. Once you have looked into the abyss, it looks back into you. Ghost Stories in Washington, D.C. This happened quite a few years ago, when I lived in Washington, D.C. I just moved into my friend's place, a small old house near the city center. It had a basement, where our band would practice, a ground floor with living room and kitchen, and upstairs with 3 bedrooms, but again very small place. The other 2 roommates were a couple, and a few months after I moved in, the woman, let's call her A, announced she was pregnant, and almost immediately after that, weird stuff started to happen. One of the first things was both together and individually started to think we heard footsteps upstairs and coming down the stairs. We lived near a hood that had lots of crime and crack problems, and the city was going through a bad crime period at that time. So the possibility of someone breaking into the house was very real. But this never seemed to be the case. Over a period of weeks, this increased to almost nightly, until we then started to think we saw a figure. We all saw it alone, but the same thing. What looked like a young woman with maybe old clothes. At this point, we were all mostly laughing about it because it seemed so typical, and we didn't feel afraid at all. But then one night, when me and my roommate were out at another band practice when A called us in a panic. She was home alone, and she said it sounded like someone was in the basement throwing things around. She thought someone had broken in and called the police, and we raced home, which was about 45 minutes away. The police came and found nothing. Everything was okay downstairs, and no windows or doors are broken. But we all thought of the ghostly things that we had been having, and how this seemed to be a definitely escalation. The sounds of walking, seeing a strange figure, and the noises in the basement continued. But soon we thought that it seemed to be having more experiences. Another thing that happened was that once A and M were in bed and saw a red ball fly from one wall into another. This scared the crap out of them, and I was not home when it happened though. And we also each had one or two times when it felt like something tapped our shoulder from behind. A side note here. M and myself were atheists and very skeptical people, while A grew up in the South and was very superstitious and spiritual, but he was not religious. So everything just kept on slowly getting more and more. Unfortunately, A had discovered that she was having twins, but that both were extremely weak and small, and would most likely be born very premature, which kind of added a layer of anxiety and sadness over everything. A then had the idea to go to a psychic, whom at the time I just was very anti and really didn't want to go, but we all did. He told us that the ghosts were spirits that were not sure if they wanted to come into this world again. She believed in reincarnation. I didn't pay attention to any of it because I just was a believer in that stuff. Although the strange haunting type stuff was starting to get to me. Then I had my personal worst experience. M and A had gone for the night to M's parents' house, and I was there alone. It was about sundown, and the noises of things being thrown around started in the basement, and the power went out. I was like, fuck that, and called some friends that lived in a few blocks away, and asked if I could come over right away. So I did, and walked over. Walked up the 4 flights of stairs. They opened the apartment door, and the power went out, along with 2 large paintings hanging on the wall falling. This part I would never believe if someone else told me that it happened. Now I was completely in panic mood, thinking that whatever this had maybe followed me. Anyway, I asked to spend the night, and nothing else happened until the middle of the night, when you could all hear someone walking back and forth down the street, whistling. There were plenty of addicts and criminals in the neighborhood, so it could have been that. We looked though from that window and couldn't see anyone, so we were all very scared. All these things kept happening, and then one night A had to rush to the hospital. After a very dangerous few hours, where losing the babies was really possible, she finally gave birth. They were not healthy and to stay in the hospital for a few months, if I remember correctly. And when they got to come home, they each had an oxygen tank and were sickly for the first year, but all of the weird, ghostly stuff stopped happening, and there was nothing else. I have only had a few weird things happen in my life, and still I'm super skeptical towards a lot of things, but this I was never able to explain anyway. So it was crazy, so much crazy.